What's up guys, Asian here with our first class-specific build video of Dragonhold, and this is going to be the Stamina Necromancer. So the Stamina Necromancer has not moved at all from its top spot in terms of Stamina DPS classes, mainly because Major Vulnerability is still a class-unique debuff on the Necromancers, even though it has seen a bit of a nerf overall, so you can no longer stack Stamina Necromancers and get close to 100% uptime and major vulnerability. The fact that it still exists and it is still such a strong debuff means that Stamina Necromancers still take the top spots for DPS. On top of that, their overall DPS is also pretty much one of the strongest in the game right now for Stamina DPS. So Stamina Necromancers, if you're running them right now, be content in the fact that at the very least for the Dragonhold patch, you will still be on the top of the Stamina DPS order. So, this build video, just to give you guys some background here, is the first in the new format that I'm using. So we will not be going over gear, we will not be going over race options, attributes, Mundus stones, things like that. That is all covered in a separate video, which should be popping up in the upper right hand corner now. So if you're interested in knowing what gear I'm using, what my race is, my attribute distributions, my CPs, etc., you should click on that video, pause this one, check that one out, and then come back here. This video is strictly about skills and the rotation. So let's go ahead and get started here. So for our skills, this is a dual wield build. We're running Venom Skull, Blighted Blastbones, Avid Boneyard, Barbed Trap, Detonating Siphon, and Flawless Dawnbreaker on the front bar. On our back bar, which is the bow bar, we have Skeletal Archer, Poison Injection, Arrow Barrage, Barbed Trap, again, Detonating Siphon, and Pestilent Colossus. For Arrow Barrage, you can swap this out with Endless Hail. The DPS difference between the two, if you're using a Master's Bow, is generally speaking going to be pretty small overall. And using Endless Hail will allow you to use, make the most benefit out of using a Maelstrom Bow for trash fights. So you can swap this out with the other morph, Endless Hail. As for the front bar here, Avid Boneyard allows you to use your own synergy, which is really good if you're using Lakestes, but the other morph of Boneyard also has its own sort of utility as well. Unnerving Boneyard provides an AoE major fracture and major breach, which might be more beneficial if you don't already have a AoE source of fracture and breach already through like a Stamina Warden, DPS for example. It's definitely something that I would consider swapping out if you have another source of major fracture, major breach here. But you're mainly using it for the self-synergy in order to get better Lakestes uptimes. The other thing too is you can also swap out Flawless Dawnbreaker for Pestilent Colossus here in order to get more crit chance in execute through the, the Death Knell passive. Right now we have a 40% increase to our critical damage, critical weapon crit. Right now we're sitting at 45.9 weapon crits, so in execute, we'd be sitting at around 100% crit chance when we have major savagery and minor savagery added in. So if you want to add in the Pestilent Colossus, you certainly can, but it is not absolutely necessary because you're already getting close to 100% crit chance in execute already, so you want the extra weapon damage from having Flawless Dawnbreaker here. If you are looking for some form of self-heal, the best one to use would probably be Mortal Coil because it does give you a pretty nice heal over time. It also restores stamina. So this is probably my personal option for a self-heal, but you could also go with something like Vigor. Echoing Vigor is going to be the better one, just because it also heals other people, and it does stack with other Echoing Vigors. So if you have a lot of stamina DPS and you're all running Echoing Vigor, that's actually quite a lot of heals over that 8-second duration here. If you need to run a self-heal, just replace the Barbed Trap on the back bar with your self-heal. So it would be either Vigor or, if you're like me, Mortal Coil instead. Other potential moves that you could run instead of these. So a lot of these abilities, I'd say, are not really what I like to call swappable. They're not really flex spots at all. The only one I'd probably say would be Detonating Siphon because it is a little bit buggy to get around. If you're having trouble getting Detonating Siphon to work, I would still keep it slotted because you still get the damage done increase of 3%. But if you don't want to even slot it at all, you could just run something like Bending Slashes instead, or even Whirling Blades for execute. If you do decide to use Whirling Blades, you're going to want to start using it at around 35 to 30% health remaining in order to get a little bit of extra execute damage. So if you take a look at the tooltip here, set at 183 compared to Venom Skull 8620. If we don't count the additional 20% for every third cast, you are going to want this to be somewhere around that 30% range is where you're going to start to see breaking even points. But as you'll see in the rotation, there's actually not a lot of time overall for spambles, so you might not necessarily be able to get a lot of uses out of Whirling Blades here. The other thing you could do is you could also run Whirling Blades instead of Avid Boneyard, and then shift Avid Boneyard to the back bar like this, in place of Barbed Trap. This is another setup that I used that pulled pretty similar DPS to the current setup that I had earlier. It's kind of how you want to run around with that. So I'll be using this setup right here for the parts here, just because the DPS difference between this and the prior setup is within margin of error overall. But that's pretty much it. Like I said, not a lot of flex spots here. In terms of ultimate, here you could run the Reanimate ultimate, either Animate Blastbones or Renewing Animation. In sort of progression style stuff, just because it acts as a kind of mass resurrection. It does cost quite a lot of ultimate, and generally speaking, more DPS is just as useful as rezzing people. So you kind of have to decide which one you want to use here. You would be losing out on some DPS because you would be swapping out Flawless Dawnbreaker here. Now, one of the things that's unique about Necromancers is that you have a couple of interesting passives here. So the first one is going to be Dismember, which gives you additional physical and spell penetration while you have a Gravelord ability active. And also under the Bone Tyrant line, Last Gasp, which gives you some additional max health. So you have a little bit more flexibility when it comes to CPs here, because you do have some additional physical penetration. So for a Stamina Necromancer, your CPs are going to differ compared to some other classes. So because you have the additional 1500 penetration, you have 56 Mighty, 36 Piercing, 66 Precise Strikes, 40 Thaumaturge, and 72 Master at Arms. That's just because you have additional 1500 physical penetration, and you're running dual wield. If you decide to run a two-handed build, your trait of choice is probably going to be Sharpened, but you don't have to run it because you still have the additional 1500 penetration. So if you decide to go with a two-handed build, go ahead and put the battle axe on here. You don't necessarily have to run Sharpened. As you can see here right now, we're sitting at 5869, so you don't have to change CPs at all. Only, obviously, if you're running Whirling Blades, you would have to swap that out with Executioner instead of Whirling Blades, so that way you still maintain that Execute. And very similarly to Whirling Blades, going to want to start using this around 35-30% health remaining, just so that way it out DPS's Venom Skull. But that is the two-handed build, but again, you don't necessarily have to run Sharpened here. So if we go ahead and transmute this into Precise, which would probably be the next best trait. Go ahead and transmute this into Precise here. We would need to obviously adjust our CPs, because now our penetration did go down a little bit, so 3000. So we would need to make up some CPs here. So if you decide to go with Precise, you will need to shift CP points around. You would be dropping Precise Strikes and Mastered Arms down to 61, and you'd be bumping up Piercing. You can probably drop Thaumaturge up to 37 too, to 62. You would still be a little bit underneath. You'd still be underpenning by about 1,000 or so, but there is one potential option to do if you decide to go with Precise rather than Sharpen as your two-handed trait. We'll turn our CPs back to our original two-handed build setup here, just because we're running two-handed here. Drop that down, that like so. Swap back here. Just make sure to Sharpen is on your offhand for dual wield and your Nirnhound's on the main hand, like so. And that's pretty much your skill bar. So again, not a lot of flexibility here when it comes to Necromancers. Now in terms of rotation, we'll do it on a 6 million dummy here just to give you guys an idea. It is highly dynamic. So this is basically going to be centered around using Blastbones. So Blastbones, go ahead and take a look at the tooltip here. It does take 2.5 seconds to, quote, arm, so you will have to do 2 global cooldowns between each cast of Blastbones. And this is assuming that you're able to stand within melee range. So if we go into combat here, summon our Blastbones, we're able to use 2 abilities before it explodes. But if we are farther away, like over here for example, Blastbones does take a bit of time to get there, so you're gonna have to adjust for that a little bit depending on how close you are. Obviously, with this build, you will be within melee range at all times, so it'll always be 2 global cooldowns between Blastbones. So you want to start off with something with your rearming trap, or barbed trap, I should say. Start with your backbar dots. I just like to apply all of them right off the bat, and then start going into Venom's skull. And then it's just dynamic, so you just want to keep an eye on all of your dots here. So that's your barbed trap, your graveyard, your arrow, your siphon, and just re-up them as they start to run out. This does mean you're going to have a lot of bar swapping going on here, and if you don't have any dots that need to be renewed, that's when you would use your Venom Skull or your Execute, depending on whether you're running a two-handed or a dual-wield build. The dots that you can allow to run out would be things like Boneyard and Siphon. It's more important that you maintain Endless Hail or El Barrage, Poison Injection, and Barbed Trap for various reasons. So if you need to let any dots drop at all, you can let Siphon and Boneyard drop. Boneyard's not going to be really doing that much DPS. You're mainly using it for the extra synergy to help with Lakesti's uptime for that Major Slayer bonus. And then obviously, as you get your Colossus, just drop it whenever it pops up. Even if that means you have to use 3 global cooldowns on your back bar rather than 2 global cooldowns. And you kind of see this more in action when we go over the actual 21 million dummy parse here. So I just realized I have to put back on Whirling Blades rather than Executioner because we're doing dual wield. So we will be doing a 21 million dummy parse here. Now I am using Veldreth rather than Marslok like I have in the gear video, and that's just because Marslok actually does less damage on a 21 million dummy because they did kind of adjust negative debuffs, what counts as negative debuffs. So Marslok doesn't do quite as much damage on a 21 million dummy compared to using Veldreth, so we're just going to be using Veldreth here. In an actual organized raid, Marslok will be stronger. Just keep in mind that you will have a harder time sustaining with Marslok, so if you're struggling with sustain, don't bother running Marslok, just stick with Veldreth instead. Another thing I want to point out here is that I am using parse food for this parse, so that is Lavafoot here. This is just to help simulate a scenario where you're getting some additional synergies from other classes, and you are still running Artaeum Takeaway Broth. So we're still getting the max stamina and we're getting the stamina regen. It's just supplemented a little bit because we would be getting some additional synergies from other classes potentially. So that just kind of reflects the additional resources we would get from the Undaunted passives that would give us resources whenever we use synergies. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started with the rotation here. Again, this is very dynamic, so there is no written rotation. So please do not ask if I can write out the rotation because there is no written rotation. It is a dynamic rotation. You are just basically doing Blastbones, 2 abilities, Blastbones, 2 abilities. What you will notice at 35 to 30% is instead of using Venom Skull, I swap over to Whirling Blades when I don't have any dots to renew. So let's go ahead and get started here. So again, I like to just open up with all of my dots on my back bar and then get into the rotation. So one of the things I do want to mention here is that you do want to make sure that when you use Graveyard that you kind of have it centered on you. That's just because the synergy activation area is actually pretty much right in the center of the grave skulls, as you can see. What are they called? Headstones. Just be mindful of that. So it's more important to up our Endless Hail rather than Boneyard and Siphon. We do that rather than re-up those 2 dots. No dots to renew, so we just do 2 Venom Skull class instead. Barbed Trap is more important here. Actually, I'm having my Blastbones bugged out there, so I lost something. So we're just gonna reset the dummy here, just so that way we can get a better parse out of this. Sorry about that. That does happen from time to time. So Blastbones was blacked out, so I actually couldn't use it at all, and that kind of messed up the rotation. So we're just going to redo it here, just so we can get a more accurate representation. I did find that bar swapping back and forth will renew it, but then you're losing quite a few global cooldowns there. So just better to see if we can get a clean parse. If it happens again, I'll just keep on going with the parse. Make sure you're activating synergies on your front bar here. It happened again. You can see here it is a bug, and it is definitely very annoying to deal with. So we'll just get our ultimate up, and we'll try a third time. Hopefully it doesn't happen. Doesn't happen all the time, but it does happen from time to time, and it is quite annoying to deal with. So we'll just get our ultimate back up, and then we'll reset the dummy and try again. If it happens again, then we'll just have to deal with it and just double bar swap and deal with a lower parse. I believe I do have a normal parse saved up, so I will be able to show you that if the parse does end up getting messed up because of that Blastbones bug. Again, unfortunate, but they haven't managed to fix this at all yet, so it's just something you have to deal with as a Stamina Necromancer, unfortunately. I missed the activation of our Colossus. Just gonna activate it now. As you can see, because we're renewing our dots fairly often, there's actually not a lot of time to do our spambles. Might be able to get one off here and there, but it's mostly just watching dots. And Barbed Trap is more important than Avid Boneyard. I needed that. So far so good with the Blastbones bug. Hopefully I didn't jinx it just then. God damn it, there we go again. So we'll just keep going with the bug. So now we do have quite a bit of time here between dots, so we can spend some time spamming Venom Skull, but not that much. we're sitting at around 30% health now, so instead of running Venom Skull as a spamble, and we have downtime between dots, we'll be using Whirling Blades now. Oh, it happened again on us. A good thing I have some past parses saved up. This parse is not going to be quite as good as those other parses. It's up to you if you want to drop certain skills in Execute. So you saw that I'd ended up dropping Boneyard and the Archer in Execute. It's up to you if you want to do that or not. I just wanted to get to the end of the parse just because this parse actually wasn't that great because we did have the Blastbones bugs in there a few times. But I do have a better parse saved up here. So let's ignore this one. I had a better parse here somewhere. This one. So here's one parse here, so 86.5k if you round up. So pretty strong overall. The strongest parse that I've seen out of a Stamina Necromancer is around 93, 94k or so. So I'm not quite as good at Necromancers as other DPS players are, but that's kind of what you can expect to hit with a Necromancer here. So for me, it's around 86.5, but if you really practice and get a good rotation down, you could hit up to 93, 94k here. I believe in here I did not get the Blastbone bug, but something you might have to deal with in an actual raid. Again, to get out of it, you just have to bar swap twice, but if it really is a little bit tricky because if you're not expecting it at all, then it just messes up your rotation entirely and your bar swapping, so it does end up dropping your DPS by a noticeable amount. So you can compare it here, the 86.5 compared to the 82.5. A couple of things messed up here and there, but that the two Blastbone bugs probably brought me down a couple of DPS, a couple of thousand DPS because of the mixture there. Just keep in mind that we are getting a lot of Major Slayer, which shouldn't be that big of an issue, at least comparing to other classes, just because in an actual raid environment, you would be getting slightly better Major Slayer uptime. Plus, the difference is not really large enough to make that big of a noticeable difference in a solo parse. For other stamina DPS, you probably get around 60% uptime on Major Slayer, so again, not very strong. You'll probably only get additional 2 to 3% DPS out of that difference there. So Stamina Necromancers are still going to be on the top of the order when it comes to overall Stamina DPS strength, mainly because of that major vulnerability, but also they just do the most amount of damage overall. That concludes this build video. If you guys have any questions or comments about the build, please feel free to leave them down in the comment section below. Hope you guys found this informative, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.